them as they're working on their assignment, which we'll talk to you a little bit about here after we make introductions, because I don't know if they would characterize this as a typical graduate school assignment or not, but they're doing amazing work, and I'm so happy. I mean, it's just amazing. So I'll talk about that in a minute when we get a few more folks on or when the official start time comes. So let's see. Hi, Damon. Hi, Ashley. Hi, Rachel. Angie, good evening.
Hi, same to you.
Yeah, pretty soon I may not be able to keep track of everyone as you start filtering in. You know, April, one of my favorite sayings in response to your saying that you've got a lot of work to do at the state. You know what the reward for good work is? More work to do.
No good deed goes unpunished.
Oh no, it's like, hey, you must be doing something right if people keep asking you to do more work, right? Well, I appreciate you all joining, and I do have we will be recording this evening. I'll give a real brief introduction, and then I'll ask my ODE colleagues to give a brief introduction of who they are and what their role is, and maybe anything else they'd like to share about maybe what they were doing before they came to ODE, or anything about that you would like to share would be great. Just to save a little time, I won't ask all of my student colleagues to give a hello with voice, but you folks could certainly type into chat and introduce yourself, like where your school is maybe, or your home, just so if our ODE colleagues want to just kind of see the diversity of the people that we have here, that would be great. So I'll give a real brief, or maybe I should volunteer one of the students to give a real. Anyone want to explain this project we're working on, or should I do that? I don't see any volunteers. Okay. So we have, this is an ethics course in our administrative principal preparation program. And we have 81 students in 3 sections. And although about 20 of them are in our Master of Education program taking the same course, but not necessarily preparing to be principals. We have a simulation going where groups of anywhere from like 7 to 10 people are representing one of the Newburgh schools. We have 10 schools in Newburgh, 2 high schools, 2 middle schools, and 6 elementary schools. And we've been working with Newburgh administrators to get data from those schools, demographic data, achievement data, if they want to look at that. They've been asked to learn about the school they're representing. And they're just completing now an in-service program for their staff at the school that relates to the ethical frameworks and applying those so that it's kind of a way for them to learn the content, the ethical content of the course. But the big project that they're also working on that will culminate the last week of class is one that we've invited you to kind of interact with us about, because they've been given the assignment to develop a reopening plan for their school for the fall, paying attention to safety, to staffing, to resources, to the demographics of their school, and with a special attention to equity. And so they have access to ODE documents, Newburgh documents. They've got essentially, they have to ferret out any resources they can. I gave them a very vague assignment, and we sharpened that up just a little bit yesterday as a way of helping people realize that this is a moving target. Many of you have realized in your own schools that things seem to change on a weekly basis about what we're expected to do.
What happened?
So I think that's enough of an introduction of the project. And now I'll turn it over to April and let's see, there's only two of you. Emmett, Amit, pronounce your name for me, please.
Yes, it's Amit, Amit
Amit.
Dabrowski.
Okay,
And
thank you.
I'll go quickly and just to say hello. And I'm the social science specialist for the Oregon Department of Education. And so working on all things social science, including our new ethnic studies, integrated social science standards, the Holocaust and genocide studies, the new civics law that just passed this month. And then this morning I was presenting to COSA about our new Every Student Belongs rule, which is also now a law as of the beginning of this month as well. So thank you for having me. I'll turn it over to April.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Amit. And I'm sure you all know what COSA stands for, the Coalition of School Administrators, but I am just onboarding a couple new staff members. And so I'm really trying to be really cautious about using acronyms, but we use acronyms all the time. And so thank you, Amit, so much. And yes, it looks like it might be just Amit and I, and we will do the best we can with this conversation. We definitely, and Amit, I don't want to speak for you, but we definitely don't have all the eyes and ears of ODE. Like we have pretty specific roles at ODE, and will offer any information, any knowledge about those specific roles. So good to see everyone. I apologize. I shut my camera off because I'm having a little bit of internet connectivity issues this evening, which is like, I'm sure there'll be, or there might be already an emoji on that. But anyway, so we're really happy to be here. Hope to have a really open and honest, transparent conversation about any questions you have, and anything Amit and I can't answer, we would be happy to take back and hopefully get a more clear and concise answer. And so thank you, Mr. Hadley, for having us this
Sure,
evening.
thanks, April. Listen, tell us what your role is at ODE.
Thank you, Scott. Yes, so my role currently at EDE is I'm the director of the Office of Indian Education. Prior to my role, so I've been on since 2013. Prior to my role at ODE, I was the higher education director at my tribe, which is the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, and am an alumni with George Fox. So this is really exciting for me. And I just really congratulate all of you. This has got to be hard during COVID to be in a virtual setting, going through all your courses. And so just much appreciation to everyone on the call tonight.
Thank you, April. I'll kind of get the ball rolling by saying that one of the things I hoped for out of this conversation was not necessarily technical information, although if folks want to ask questions about, hey, I'm looking for a resource about X, if you can point them in that direction, that's great. And I really appreciated the fact that you made it clear that you're not representing the entire ODE personnel and, policy structure, which, I appreciate that. And I wouldn't expect you to try to be such. But I'm just interested if you two could start off by just giving a perspective about what your view is as far as what is the state noticing about how we need to help schools and schools help kids as we're looking forward to trying to come back in the fall semester, knowing that a number of districts are doing summer programming. But I've asked these folks in my courses not to worry or to think about summer as much because those things are already ramping up, but to think about, well, what is it going to be like in the fall? And what are some things that you might like to point out about what schools and teachers and administrators should be thinking about and preparing for based on what we have learned about what families and kids have been facing, over the last 15 months? Why don't we just start with kind of a general question like that? And so your opinions are fine, but I'm really curious about that because we did interview some folks from Newburgh last week, and they had particular views about what they thought was important and what they were going to do and so forth. But now I'm interested in what you folks might like to say about that.
April, do you want to start? All right, I will start. So,
Sorry, Amit, I was
okay.
talking on mute, but go for it.
Okay. Well, I'll just what we're doing at ODE really is constructing some guidance around summer learning, and so I know this group is not too focused on that, but there is a number of pieces of guidance that have gone out starting, I think, in the month of April, that started going out to school districts around the ways to approach summer learning and this idea of sort of unfinished learning instead of sort of learning loss. And so really thinking about how to help kids re-engage with school in real life. And so some of that guidance is really about community building and about understanding the kids in your classroom, knowing the families. So that guidance that we sort of started talking about before COVID, that's sort of, I think, doubly true in our newest guidance. And then with the new funding from the federal government that's coming through the state, but is mostly passed to local districts, right? Most of that money is not in state hands, but in district hands. There's, I don't know if it's a second or third set of guidance around the ESSER funding. So the ESSER 3 guidance, I think, is a shorthand for that. And sorry, April, I don't know what the acronym stands for, actually. April will come back on and tell us. But we do use a lot of acronyms. So that's kind of, I think, the big overview is just sort of what we're looking at is we've already sort of issued some policy recommendations for schools. From a social science lens, I think it's fair to say that there's been a lot of focus on the conversation around race and equality and justice in the United States since at least May 25th of last year. And that's really only ramped up since May of this year with our school board elections on May 18th in Oregon. We've seen just a lot of activity at school board meetings in the month prior and in the month since those elections. And so I think depending on the grade level of your students, like you should certainly expect to have the opportunity to have really good conversations about what students are seeing around them, how they want to engage with this conversation around equity and justice and the social issues that they're seeing, race, et cetera. So, I'm feeling good about where our ethnic studies standards are. They're not required until 2026, but school teachers that want to jump into those, social science teachers want to jump into those, that could be some good material to help frame some of those conversations.
Thank you, Amit. I'd sure like to follow up on that, but I'm going to hold my questions and comments until others have had a chance. April, do you want to make an opening statement then?
Yeah, I echo exactly what Amit just said. And to get really personal, we're seeing a lot of social and emotional needs with our students right now for our population. So the population I work with, which is American Indian, Alaska Native, and / Indigenous students, an uptick in, unfortunately, suicide. And so we're looking at ways at a state level that we can support those students coming back to the school year. And I say that with one, a heavy heart, and two, knowing that our teachers and educators might be feeling, like the same kind of weight. And so again, just trying to, at a state level with the limited scope that I have in our office, looking at supports to support them as well. And again, I don't mean to be too heavy, and it's a reality that we're dealing with, in my opinion.
Well, I think it's okay to be heavy. I mean, part of what we need to be able to wrestle with, and I hope that, in an ethics course, if nowhere else, we can wrestle with the fact that every time we make a decision in a school, there's impact on families and kids, and it may not be an equal impact depending on, where those children sit, and what home they're in and where they're from and what their family income is. And I think most of my colleagues here, have lived that in their own districts, and they're grappling with now trying to kind of figure out what their own ethical framework is, and realizing that in our profession, people come to this profession with maybe different values, but we know that what we really all need to commit to is what's in the best interest of kids. And so it's like, well, how do you get there? And I think part of how you get there is you have to admit there's some really heavy stuff going on to kids. And some of it is kind of hidden because it's hard for us. We don't want to admit it. Anyway, that's my commentary about the heaviness.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah.
Can I throw out a question? So my tribe, the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, just had an education summit today. Was there anyone on that from this group? I'm just curious. All right, well, we'll make sure, well, I can't make sure, but I will definitely try to get that information out earlier to folks. But I guess my thinking around that was we had one of our keynote presenters was a tribal member who had gone through our local, which is Willamina School District education system. And even though I had worked with her since she was in preschool, I was surprised about some of the information she shared, and probably information you all can relate to, but just not having, for her personally, Native American educators in the classroom, the curriculum didn't match maybe with what she knew or understood. And even the strategies or the student learning styles that could have, even though she was successful in the system, which is quite honestly unique for some of our American Indian Alaska Native students, was quite challenging for her. And so again, after listening to her today, I was like, wow, we definitely have a lot of work ahead of us. And so again, just much appreciation for being on this call. I hope you guys are brave enough to ask some really challenging questions, and Meet and I will do the best we can to try to provide some guidance if possible.
Thanks. Yeah, let's throw it open to questions now.
I have a question. So I know in our district next year this year was a pilot, but we're with tribal education with, I forgot what bill that was. But what kind of supports is ODE helping with districts this incoming year, and what are kind of the accountability measures that you'll use when to help districts implement the tribal education?
Thank you so much for asking that question. I'm assuming you're talking about Senate Bill 13, which is our tribal history, shared history. And right now, there's no carrot or stick, meaning like there's no incentive for districts to do it other than it's the law. And there's no penalties if a district doesn't do that. But what we are offering is, and I'll post this here in a second on our website, we have all of our lessons on our website. We have a variety of different training modules that we're encouraging people to do that will help them feel more comfortable in implementing those lesson plans. And we're anticipating more. Like, we're just going to keep putting more and more up on our website. And I'm not quite sure if that answered your full question, but I will be happy to post anything in a meet. You've been really involved in this, so if I'm missing anything, can you share too?
Yeah, I think. Well, I mean, the point that you mentioned about the modules is really important because that's been really successful, I think, for teachers who have been able to join that learning. And so we've seen districts, especially in like Portland metro area districts, that have taken a deep dive into those modules. They've reported out that they are feeling really good and really excited about teaching the lessons that are offered through Senate Bill 13. And I mean, I think that's also something to consider, is that of all the sort of pieces we have around expanding the narrative or the voices that are in our classroom and the histories and the stories, it's really the tribal history, shared history that has actual lesson plans and actual teacher training to go with it. On the other ones that I mentioned earlier, those are really state laws that then it's the responsibility of the district to provide the training and connect teachers with materials. So here you have really a place where ODE has created, through the legislation, created a space for districts to sort of grab training and materials at the same time.
Other questions?
Sarah looks like she has a question.
Thank you. So we were on a great momentum with May 8th and doing all that. And I think that created an opening for at least a talk of all the inequities, like not having enough counselors in schools and not having enough, resources for classroom teachers to actually be able to help the students. And so, then COVID hit, and that was just like, everything was crazy then. And April, you mentioned, social emotional learning is going to be a huge thing coming back. And I feel like how is the ESSER dollars probably won't even help that, because it's like a one-time funding thing and then it's done. It's not like something that's going to be reoccurring. And we can only get 9.3 from the state when we really need like 9.6. So I feel like we're always playing catch up with this stuff. Like, how can we really focus on this when we don't have the resources and the money for the resources?
Well, what we're seeing with the way some of the school districts are talking about their planning for the ESSER dollars, is really trying to take an approach that is like systemic rather than in the moment, right? So if you're hiring somebody to do social emotional learning, that person is not there just to deal with the kids that are, going to be there for next year and maybe the year after, but really is working on setting up a system in which you're looking at, where are the spaces in the day to do social emotional learning? Who are the sort of the adults in the building who can be trained and do some work on that ongoing? And so I think you're right. We're always behind in funding at the state level, not just in Oregon, but across the country. That's always an issue. And so I think one of the sort of pieces that we've been talking about in many different ways is sort of like, what are the structures, right? It's not so much about like the person to person, as far as just making a change at a policy level, but what are the like policies that you can implement at your school that can have long-term implications, right, for doing good things for kids.
Thank you, Ami. And Sarah, I totally agree with Ami. Like, it has to be a systems change for us to move the dial. And that takes a lot of time, a lot of resources, and it's not going to happen in a year. So we've seen some movement with the population I work with American Indian, Alaska Native. So when I came on board in 2013, we were are, and I guess I'll share this knowing that this isn't like the end all for success, but we all anticipate kids graduating, right? So like graduation is like the goal, right? And so before I came on, our population was less than 50. I think it was like 46%. And then given a little bit of resources, I feel like our American Indian and Alaska Native State Plan and just the work that all of us have done at ODE has moved that dial. So we were pre-COVID up by 11% in terms of graduation rates. All that being said, I think still back to Amit's initial comment was if we can't change systems, we could get these small wins, but it's not going to be a long-term success, if that makes any sense.
One of the things that the Newburgh people told us last week is their dilemma in trying to figure out how to spend the ESSER dollars, because they realized that if they ramped up staffing this fall, first they're telling those hires, you may be here 1 year and then you're done. And the other thing is realizing that that really may only be a temporary fix and doesn't really do much to help kids and schools in the long run. So what was your solution? Do you remember what they said their solution was? Anyone? Bueller? They said they were going to invest in a lot of professional development, because what they felt like is if they could help teachers acquire more skill and more knowledge, better, equip them, the ones that they currently had, that there was a hope then that everyone that was currently in the system could increase their capacity to do better work. Part of my, that I guess we'll find out in our local district here if that is going to help, but I don't know if all districts are like that. Amit, you alluded earlier to something like that, maybe what you were hearing, some districts were investing in things other than necessarily hiring new personnel for a short period. Can you give any other examples of what you've been hearing around the state about investments that are going to be made and are being made? I guess summer program obviously is one of those investments, yes?
Yeah, I think where I've been hearing about investment is districts planning on professional training and professional development for their teachers. And I think using some of this funding, this new federal funding, makes a lot of sense for districts. I don't want to say that some of those other districts aren't hiring, but the point of their hiring is with sort of an audit mindset. Like these people will come in and evaluate the system and point out some places that could be potential for long-term growth and investment of time, if not money. So the pieces around like what happens in the classroom. So SEL becoming more than just a standalone or a health class sort of issue, but really becoming integrated into everything that we do. Thinking about the ways that, and with our new social science standards, that we've brought in opportunities to talk about student identity in all its different forms, and the way that we hope that continues to go throughout the content areas. That's another place where we've seen some professional development happening, not only in social science, but science and in language arts. So like it's sort of trickling through, and some of that was happening before the federal money was coming through, but I think it's hopefully we'll get a boost with this federal money. Jen.
I love the thought of having all teachers trained in SEL. I think that's super important and needed. A couple questions. So first off, most of my class sizes are like 35. So how are teachers supposed to be responsive to like trauma-informed care, do all these things, and also like make sure like each kiddo is okay? Because 35 kids, I can't even check in more than 1 minute with a student per class period. So that's concerning unless there's going to be more money to maybe reduce class sizes. And are teachers involved in the process of making these decisions? Like, I mean, we're on ground level. We see what's going on in our classroom, and I think it's really important that teachers are involved in this, or I hope they are.
Well, that's my response to that is how active has the association been in lobbying the legislature? We have any union people here that could address that question?
Yeah, so yeah, we've lobbied a lot. So what we did in David Douglas was our district office, they did a survey and they got did listening sessions with community, with students, with staff. So the perception was everyone was involved and gave input, and then the district came out with sort of a wish list proposal with like social studies TOSAs, equity TOSAs, like all these line items. And then in the end, what happened was that so part of the SIA fund is that if your district is estimated to like drop in budget or like operate in the hole or under but over, basically have a deficit of a certain percent, then those SIA funds can use to fill those holes. So as opposed to like reducing class size by hiring more teachers and everything, our district decided to fill in holes, like positions that would normally be cut or whatever, instead of like spending it on ways to improve our district. So there's ways to get around it, and that's one thing our district did. So there's definitely the perception of community input and everything, but in the end, it was the district office.
Well, that's one example, but I'm not sure if it's typical or not, but my guess is it may be typical. And that's just one man's opinion. Other questions? We did have a couple of comments, by the way, in chat just about Jessica tells about what their district is doing with funding, and Sarah's pointing out that there was supposed to be association input on the way the money was spent, but at least in David Douglas, maybe that wasn't a real reality. Other questions, comments, observations?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I guess for April, how are you, what types of needs are you seeing particular to the students that you serve? So some of those students that may traditionally have been part of marginalized populations, what needs should we be looking for that may be unique to some of those populations in addition to the ones that like all kids are experiencing? I kind of putting an equity lens on it and finding for our kids that are often overlooked, what type of particular things should we be on the lookout for them?
Thank you, Angie. And I hope your name's Angie. I'm always so cautious about our names in the little boxes. So, so I guess I would say two big lifts. One is curriculum. So making sure curriculum is not just historically. I know that tribal history, shared history sounds like it's history, but we also are obviously here in the contemporary. And so having, that more contemporary look and then strategies. And so I posted in, after Amit spoke a little bit, like all of the resources that we have for Senate Bill 13. And again, my lens is mostly just American Indian, Alaska Native. I wish I could give a larger lens, but that's kind of where my support is. And so I will, not to put Amit on the spot again, but if there's other thoughts Amit has, I would love to hear those.
So Edgy, your question is as far as what other communities and what resources we have for those?
Yes, that, and how can those of us on the ground in the classrooms and in buildings, what are the look fors to see? You know, April talked about the suicide rates, for example, and I mean, are our kids from these populations that are sometimes overlooked? How do we not overlook them? So I guess kind of from a strategy standpoint as well.
Yeah, I mean, you know, what we talk about a lot is culture responsive education, right? Culture responsive teaching, right? So you've heard that. I can see from the nodding, like, yeah. So what does that really look like, though, right? And so part of it is, you know, understanding who's in your classroom, and so there is no one size fits all for that, right? There's just different communities and different classrooms, and then different realities for different grade levels too, and so that's all really hard, and that goes back to Jen's point, like, it's really hard to know your students when you have 35 students and you have a lot of things to teach. But I think what we're really trying to highlight in not only the summer guidance, but in this guidance going forward is the importance of taking the time to check in with your students, to get to know your students, to doing activities that allow the students to know one another, to, you know, really just opening with that, how are you doing type of question that I know seems really simple. But, you know, is easy to overlook in the sort of rush of the day, and in dealing with that one kid that, you know, seems to need attention more than everybody else. You kind of forget to check in with the other students. And so it's, I think, just being really conscientious about that. And, you know, thinking about how you want the school day to look for students. And so these are big generalities I'm giving, but as far as like the look fors, I mean, I think, you know, when I was in the classroom, I was in the classroom for 25 years. Like, I could always tell the kid who was not enjoying my class, right? I didn't always have the answer to how to make that kid enjoy the class. But that was always something that, you know, just stuck with me, is like, this is the kid, or these are the kids that I can see are not having a good time. They're checked out, or they seem distracted. And so what can I do as a teacher to sort of bring those kids in? And sometimes that's just a simple teacher move that we can make in the classroom, but sometimes it's really like purposely engaging with that child and really checking in with what's going on with them. You know, I could go on, counselors, other teachers, depending on the size of your school. All those are possibilities, I think.
Thank you, Amit. Angie, I would like to offer one more suggestion. So during our the Grand Ronde Education Summit today, long story short, a teacher actually asked students, what can I do better? And that teacher took all of that to heart and was like, wow, one, I didn't realize this is what they're learning from me. And two, this is another area I need to focus on. And seems simple. And in my opinion, yep, I'm looking at your expression. I'm like, yeah, it seems simple. And
Well, I hadn't thought
often,
of that, so that's good.
okay, all right.
Yeah, and just, I mean, that goes to just a practice that I think is really important for teachers to have, is, you know, to survey students just with questions like that, and really reflect on their practice and think about what changes they want to make, what they're doing well, what they need to work on it. And, you know, asking kids to critique their teacher is, takes some bravery of the teacher, but it was a practice that I really found valuable, to just hear from my students, you know, every semester about what I could do to improve.
Thank you. I like that.
Yeah, you folks remind me, I need to do that in a couple of weeks so you can let me know what you really think, right? So, you know, I want to make a comment here that when I think I've mentioned somewhere in here that I was a dean for 5 years. And when I came out of the dean's role, I was kind of nervous about going back to the classroom. And my first course was in the summer in our doctoral program, and it was an ethics, equity, and justice course that I inherited from a retiring colleague. And as I reviewed the curriculum and looked at the text and the syllabus and all the materials she had prepared, I anticipated a statement that my students would make when I introduced the course, and that is, we already know all of this. We have in-service after in-service after PD after PD. We already know this stuff. And so I anticipated that question, and in my mind, I asked myself, is it just if we know better, will we do better? And I realized that, you know, the will is a really important thing, and that we can't control a lot of what happens to children and families outside of our own classroom. I mean, we can't even control what's going to happen to a child in the hallway or in another colleague's classroom. But we have a lot of control over the relationship that we strive to establish with those people in our class. And yes, Jen makes a really valid point. The system is kind of stacked against you in some regard, in that how are you going to develop the kind of relationship with 35 people that you understand who they are, what they need, and respond to each one differently? But that's what you've been asked to do. And it's unfortunate that, yeah, thank you for the reminder, Jen. It's, you know, I'm not saying that we can't, we just have to do the best we can, but my solution with my students in the doctoral course was, in anticipating that we already know this, was to work on developing enough empathy that we can truly understand not just the circumstances that our students are in, but actually experience, feel the circumstances they're in, experience the lack of regard or the lack of respect or the lack of resource that they have that I take for granted. And I won't go into detail now because this isn't the forum for it, but I believe that we've devised a kind of a moderately successful way of doing that for people that causes them to go back and say, I didn't realize that what I take for granted, a lot of other people in my community don't have access to. If they get to that point, and then they get a little angry about it and frustrated and say, I wonder how many other people never realized this. They just assume that, you know, everyone could walk in the door and was on an even footing, when we know that's not true. But I think it takes a point of actually experiencing that lack of resource yourself, or being told, no, you're not good enough, or you're different than us, so you lose, is what it takes oftentimes for us to say, I'm not going to take it anymore. I'm going to make a difference. And that means then that you start working with colleagues and you organize and you lobby and you advocate, which is not what you're being paid for, but you do it because you care. And you know that the system is rigged against you and your students. And then you just keep doing the best you can every day. And what more can you do? You remember Dietrich Bonhoeffer's favorite quote, it doesn't do us much good to walk southbound on a northbound train, because you're going north. No matter how far you walk south, you're still going north. And of course, his point was, is you have to change the system. And so at the same time you're teaching and helping young people learn and grow, you got to find ways of influencing those who have the resources and the wherewithal to make positive changes. And that's what I would encourage you to think about, especially those of you that are moving into leadership. Don't be passive and sit around when people say, well, this is the best we can do. And we're sorry, but there's nothing we can do about it. A district can do things if they want to do things, and they can make a difference. Amit, you made reference to school board elections, and I got to admit, I was kind of disappointed here in my community about what happened, and I'm sad. And I think some of my friends who have been in this district working hard are going to go elsewhere because they may feel like the board is no longer going to be supportive of caring about ensuring that all kids have access to the best learning activities they can. It's like, anyway, I'm sorry. I'm kind of preaching here, but it bugs me. I've lived in this community 27 years, and it's like we have people here that say, oh, if we could only go back to the basics, if we could only save our schools and go back to the way it was, as if the way it was great for all kids, and we know it wasn't. Anyway, other questions or comments?
I just want to add just one thing, maybe on this sort of, knowing better, doing better. I think that's that we always, of course, we're in education, so we always want people to know more, including our teachers. But teaching is a really funny profession in that we have we have the state legislature and we have ODE coming and telling us what to do in the classroom. We've got administrators at the school district and the school level. But in the end, you still shut your door and teach, and it's just you and those 35 kids, or over the day, those 210 kids that you have, and it can be a really isolating profession. And loving kids and loving what you do and wanting to connect with kids is sometimes not enough. All that passion and all that commitment can just be overwhelming in the realities of the day. And so, I think one thing that is really helpful is to find someone that you can check in with, right? That holds you sort of accountable, not in your, evaluation way, but just sort of that you're talking about the students that you are trying to move the needle for, that you're talking about what you want to change your practice, and you have a chance to collaborate with that person. It can be formally in sort of those PLCs that school districts have done, or it can be really just informally with someone down the hall. But if you're in a place in a position where you can actually put a structure in place like that, like every teacher needs to find a partner to talk on it, these kind of issues, I think that can be really helpful. Just as an idea of how to break out of that, I'm just in my room working on these things, and it's frustrating and overwhelming, and those kind of feelings is checking in with someone else.
Amit, I just loved what you just said, because I do feel like teachers, they hold on to a lot. I mean, just have a lot to do and standards to meet and assessments, and yeah, just grabbing someone that you can connect with, really important. So thank you, Amit, for sharing.
Yeah, and someone pointed out in the chat that that goes for administrators as well. And I told you at the beginning of this experience that you were going to meet someone in here, someone that's on that school team with you that isn't in your district, but you're going to make a friend. I encourage you to cultivate a relationship outside of your district and have that person that you can call up or get on Zoom or go have a cup of coffee or a Friday afternoon club with once in a while, just to debrief, so that you can kind of benchmark what's going on there with what's going on in the other district. I think that will be helpful to you as well when you move into your first principal's job. Because I agree, being a teacher can be very isolating, but believe me, administration can be just as lonely. Maybe more so because you have far fewer peers from which you can actually trust and rely on.
Thank you, Scott. Well said. I would never offer a meets time, but if there's anything I can do to be a thought partner with any of you, would be happy to do that.
Yeah, that certainly goes for me as well.
I think, I mean, we still have a few minutes left, but I'm okay with saying that, if there aren't any other questions or comments, we can conclude. I mean, we've all probably had a busy day, and is COSA virtual this year or in person or both?
It was both, so it was really interesting. ODE was only allowed to present virtually, but the room was pretty well filled with actual people. But Colt Gill did make it down to the session to answer any questions in the room as well. So a hybrid for sure.
Okay. Was that out at Seaside again this year? Or
Yeah.
where was it?
It was at Seaside, and I've never been an administrator, so I've never been to the Seaside COSA, but I understand there's people have thoughts about that one.
Well, I understand there's a number of watering holes there where the real conversations take place after the sessions are over. Well, folks, thank you for coming out tonight. And again, I'll make this recording available to other colleagues that were unable to be here. Do either of you, Amit or April, have any final comments you want to make before we wrap up tonight?
If you don't mind, Scott, I'm just wishing everyone the best, because education is definitely a tough profession to be in. And so whatever, again, just offering any support I can do or hooking you up with somebody at the state level, I'd be happy to do it. So congratulations and good luck.
Yes, the same. Definitely congratulations and good luck. And if there's anything I can do around our new social science standards, for sure, please call on me. But also with the conversations that have been happening at the school board meetings and our new Every Student Belongs rule, we're sort of anticipating some issues there too. So please, if you're in a school district where that comes up as an issue, feel free to reach back out to ODE. And I'm just part of a team that's working on that, so you'll have a lot of support there.
Very good. Thank you, folks, for giving your time with us this evening, and I'll be in touch. Good night, friends. I'll see you in various forum here, and we will meet next Thursday night, voluntary, of course, but if your teams have a rep there, we can do some final negotiations about your reopening plan. Thank you and good night.